experience developing and leading programs that drive financial inclusion and economic prosperity. And she's held senior positions in the government of Rwanda as Minister of State in charge of Economic Planning, Minister of Trade and Industry, and Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. She has supported and championed gender empowerment initiatives through her membership of the Alliance for Finance Inclusive Gender Committees, Women's World Banking, Africa Advisory Council, the Grasa Marcel Trust Expert Group on Women's Finance Inclusion and the Digital Economy in Africa, and New Faces, New Voices Rwanda chapter, amongst many others. So it's an honor and a privilege to have Dr. Monique to introduce, to welcome us to this session and give a few remarks about the AU. Over to you, Dr. Monique. Welcome.
Thank you, my sister Ebere, for inviting me to this forum, interesting meeting where the women are coming together. I hope there are also he for she's here around in the room, in the virtual room. So co-chairs, Professor Agnes Minagwaho, Professor Senait, Dr. Rupa Dat, Dr. Magda Robalo, and all my sisters in this meeting, all protocols observed. I would like to welcome you to this important event, which aligns very closely with the vision of women as articulated in our African Union strategy on gender equity and women empowerment. This African Union gender equity and women's empowerment strategy, as you may know, has 4 pillars. One being maximizing opportunities and outcomes of women, for women. The second one being dignity, security, and resilience. Focus on violence against women, including the challenges we know around early marriage, gender-based violence, FGM, and so on. The third being supportive and enabling legislation to protect women's rights. And the fourth one being leadership, voice, and visibility. The presentation, the teaser, or the setting the scene presentation we just followed ushered us with some sobering statistics about this last pillar on leadership, where we can see that in this particular sector of health, public health, where women represent 70% of the human capital, but unfortunately less than 25% in the leadership positions. So that's really a strong message, challenging us, of course, but calling for some action. And my sister, Professor Agnes, thank you so much for raising that point. By bringing together women leaders in public health in Africa, this event provides a platform for us to be heard and to give voice to our experience and learning during this challenging pandemic. And the focus on a historical perspective is particularly interesting. This quote by Dr. Nkosana Dlamini Zuma, my elder sister in the African Union Commission, because she was our chairperson of the commission a few years back, and she had that to say, and I quote, "If we don't put women in history books, they get edited out of history." I think that's powerful. If we don't put women in history books, they get edited out of history, end of quote. Setting the context of women's leadership of the public health system across Africa in our past ensures that we shape and lead the agenda for continued progress in this important area based on our own history and cultural context. The event starts from our past, explores our current experience, and looks forward to our future. It challenges us to constantly focus on a better future where women's contribution and leadership in the African public health system will be the norm. This choice was carefully made. As we all know, 2021 in the African Union is a year where we have rallied our efforts around and behind the theme on culture, on our heritage, on our commanding patrimoine as Africans. And really, the theme of this event this evening or this morning, depending where we are, is really very fitting. So distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome in particular our keynote speaker, Professor Nwando Achebe, who comes to this scientific conference from an African history perspective. We recognize that public health requires both science and art, and a clear grounding on where we started to inform where we are heading. I welcome our other keynote speakers who share their experience of leading through the pandemic to support as we course correct today for the immediate future. And I also welcome our second keynote speaker who speaks for the women leaders of the future and sets the challenge for us all. My thanks finally go to professors, co-chairs of this event, Professor Fisea and Professor Binagwaho, who are giants of public health and leadership across Africa for all genders, and to the women in the global health movement for championing women in health across Africa. I urge us all to use this occasion to put women in the history books. Thank you so much, and I wish all the best and fruitful deliberations to the event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Monique, and Her Excellency. Thank you for setting this scene in, centering it on the AU ambitions. We're really grateful for your presence and for joining us this morning, afternoon, evening. And so without much ado, it's my honor to introduce our first keynote speaker, and Professor Nwando Achebe, and that surname will ring bells with lots of us. Professor Nwando is a professor of history and a multi-award winning author. She's a founding editor-in-chief of the Journal of West African History. Professor Nwando got her PhD from the University of California, Los Angeles, and in 1996 and 1998, she served as a Ford Foundation and Fulbright Scholar in residence at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. Her research interests involve the use of oral history in the study of women, gender, and sexuality in Nigeria. Professor Achebe is an author of 6 books and has won awards for them, including the particular one that I'm really excited about is The Female King of Colonial Nigeria, which is a book about the only female warrant chief and king in British Africa, as it was called at the time. She's co-editor of a number of other books and publications, and she has received numerous awards from Rockefeller Foundation, amongst many others. And it is a privilege for us to have Professor Wando with us today. She normally has a one-year advance in getting her to as a speaker, but like I mentioned earlier on, we have a lot of friends and family in common, and I unashamedly leveraged that to get her to join us today. It is very early in the morning where she is, so we're particularly grateful for her time. So, Professor Wando, it's a pleasure to have you, and over to you. Next slide, please, Eberman.
Good morning. Thank you so very much, Dr. Okereke. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you for inviting me. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute, could I actually have the next slide, please? I think, which is the, yes, thank you. It is an absolute pleasure to have been asked to speak to this august gathering about African women, health, medicine, and power in historical perspective. I am extremely honored to have been invited, and I thank Dr. Ebere Okereke for doing so. To understand African women's historical engagement with health and medicine, power and authority, one must have a basic understanding of the African worldview and the place of women and the female principle within it, as well as a general understanding of the holistic conceptualization of health in the African worldview to encompass the wellness and prosperity of human beings and the society as a whole. Next slide, please. A 2014 newspaper story, Women Arrest Boko Haram Fighters in Borno, captures an incident that throws light on this understanding. Quote, women in Woza town are said to have arrested 7 Boko Haram fighters who wreaked havoc in the town. A witness from Woza said, quote, after seizing the vehicle, the insurgents moved towards Sambisa forest and met some women on the way. The insurgents wanted to attack the women, but their guns did not work. They tried hitting them with the boot of their guns, but mysteriously, all the hands of the insurgents hung. Most people fled for safety, but the women refused to flee. The insurgents were angry and wanted to attack the women, but met their Waterloo, end quote. The writer ascribes the women's brazen arrest of the Boko Haram terrorist to, quote, mystical powers directed by these women to paralyze the insurgents' guns and immobilize their hands. This ascription is an attribution that reads true for the over 3,000 nations of people that inhabit the African continent. It is a belief in the interconnectedness between the human and spiritual worlds and in the viability of power flowing from spirits to human beings. And it is these elucidations conceptualized from an African-centered perspective about the ways in which African women and or the female spiritual principle exhibit healing, medicinal, or protective power, influence, and authority that this brief keynote seeks to highlight. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. I use the terms female principle and female spiritual principle to speak to and give voice to the totality of leadership and authoritative roles occupied by female entities in Africa. In the human realm, The female principle is embodied in women's roles as overseers and females of privilege, including women leaders of their people. These women exercise great power, authority, and influence publicly, temporally, and in spiritual religious spheres. My focus on the female spiritual principle, that is, female spiritual monarchs like rain queens, spirit mediums, Sangomas, and female medicines, is informed by African cosmology, which recognizes the existence of two distinct but interconnected worlds: the human visible, or the physical world, and the more powerful and commanding spiritual invisible world. Thus, the short keynote documents a sampling of African women and the female spiritual principles endowed with the power to create, to protect, to restore, and to heal, ensuring the wellness of human beings and the society as a whole. Next slide, please. First, female medicines. In the African system, medicines can be private or public, protective or aggressive. They can also be manipulated by the diviners and priests who prepare them for the community. Some medicines are believed to derive their power from God. They are also able to act from a distance without direct contact. These medicines range from personal amulets or crossroad medicines to great, powerful, shrine-like medicines that enjoy widespread high reputation. Next slide, please. In the mid to late 19th century, in the Nigerian Igbo town of Alono, a great medicine, Adoro, emerged in response to the incessant slave raiding activities of the Aro and Nika people. The people of Alono desired protection, a worthy protector from their neighbors' slave raiding. Thus, the community pooled its resources and engaged the services of the most powerful medicine-making family in the region. The medicine makers concocted a powerful, protective female medicine called Adoro, meaning Kafa Donata, may they return, to both safeguard Alono citizens from further devastation and appeal to the exiled Alono population to return home. And protect them she did. With Adoro in place, no longer were the people of Alono cowered by the action of their enemy slavers. The Alono people were therefore able to remain in their present place, protected, safe, and whole. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So droughts are common in Southern Africa and are a threat to the well-being of the nations of the region. Thus, Sotho-speaking people routinely practice rain rituals that are directed to the ancestors, asking that they intercede on their behalf. The Lovedu believe that if these rain rituals are not performed, drought will occur, interrupting the fertility and wholeness of the environment and the community. The Lovedu rain queens, Mojaji, is the only one endowed with the power and authority to perform these rituals, to control the fertility of the environment by transforming clouds into rain, and withholding rain from Lavadu enemies. The Lavadu rain queens also guarantee the health of the community, including the yearly seasonal cycle, fertility of crops, water for human consumption, and adequate grazing for livestock. When rain is needed, Lavadu people sacrifice gifts to inform the rain queen of the crying of her people and her need to protect them and ensure their wholeness. The rain queen then gathers secrets from her rain potion medicines. She also works with rain horns to produce rain and smoke to produce clouds. Next slide, please. In the Lavadu kingdom, the Mojaji reigns supreme. Referred to the European observers and surrounding Africans as she who must be obeyed, the Mojaji was renowned, respected, and feared throughout Southern Africa. There have been 6 rain queens in living memory. Masalakwane Mojaji I ruled from 1800 to 1854. Masala Nabo Mojaji II ruled from 1854 to 95. Kesotone Mojaji III ruled from 1896 to 1959. Makoma Mojaji IV ruled from 1959 to 1980. Makope Mojaji V ruled from 1981 to 2001. And Makobe Constance Mojaji VI ruled from 2003 to 2005. Masalakwane Mojaji I was feared for her power and famous for her diplomacy and influence. Even the Zulu king, Shaka, supplicated her as rainmaker of all rainmakers. She governed without an official husband, but she was female husband to as many as 42 wives. Masalabona Mojaji II succeeded her mother. Like her mother, she was female husband to numerous wives. As reign queen, she was inaccessible to her people and seldom appeared in public, further elevating her mystique and influence in society. More than a century later, in 2003, Makobe Constantine reigned as Mojaji after the death of her grandmother. She was 25 years old. Mojaji Makobo was the only reign queen who had been formally educated. And although respected for her power, ability, and lineage, she was seen as too modern to be a reign queen. On June 12, 2005, Makobo died. The official cause of death was chronic meningitis. For many years after Makobo died, no reign queen was named, igniting fears that the 400-year-old powerful reign queen dynasty may have come to an end. These concerns, however, abated in 2016 when 11-year-old Masalanobo, daughter of Makobo, was recognized as Mojaji VII by President Jacob Zulu. Next slide, please. And so that's her. She will be formally inducted when she turns 18. Next slide, please. So the Nyamwezi areas of East Africa, present-day southern and western Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and northwest Tanzania. Women in the 1800s had an unusual degree of power, authority, and influence as spirit mediums, which provided them with long-term high-status positions. In the kingdoms of Borno and Buganda in modern-day Uganda, Buhai, Nyamwezi, and Usukuma in northwestern Tanzania, spirit possession societies centered on groups of legendary heroes known as the Swezi and the Mwanda. Swezi were the early rulers of Western Uganda. As the Swezi kingdom declined, the people began to honor the spirits of their departed ancestors. In Rwanda and Burundi, the societies were dominated by spirits of their legendary heroes called Ryangombe and Kirianga. Next slide, please. Spirit mediumship societies provided women with the greatest avenues for active participation in politics and religious life. Spirit mediumship is a form of possession in which a person serves as intermediary between the spirits and society. Society interprets possession as a sign that a spirit or deity has chosen them to inhabit a person for the good and the health of the community. Spirit mediums operated on different socio-political levels, concerning themselves with female activities such as fertility and agriculture. Mediums were powerful, authoritative, and respected. Spirit mediums were consulted either when difficulties arose or as a precautionary measure to ensure health, prosperity, and fertility. The people believed that if properly conciliated, their gods and goddesses would, through spirit mediums, intercede on their behalf. Spirit mediums were able to accomplish this through either formal initiation or direct possession. Spirit mediums were elevated and separated from regular society by the special regalia that they wore. They had secret vocabulary, possessed esoteric knowledge, and observed food taboos like those of the upper classes. Spirit mediums viewed non-initiates as minors, incapable of full participation in community affairs. Most importantly, spirit mediums possessed legal immunity. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So diviners perform the indispensable duty of unveiling the mysteries that elude human experience or reason. Among the Igbo of Eastern Nigeria, divining or Iwafa denotes to read the unreadable, to interpret the will of the gods and the goddesses, and to mediate between humans and the spirits. The most common method of divination involves casting afa beads or strings and half shells so that the will or intention of the otherwise unknowable spiritual or non-spiritual force can be read and understood. Next slide, please. Healers and herbalists are doctors who heal and protect through the curative powers of roots and herbs. Healing roots are gathered from the forest where they exist in their natural form. These herbs, once gathered, are used to produce medicines, and successful herbalists can cure many ailments with the knowledge of these medicinal plants. Some healers are endowed with the additional wisdom of preparing medicines, that is, iwawu. These doctors can produce more potent medicines because they are possessed by the spirit of Awu, the deity of medicine, health, and divination, whom they can evoke to give increased power to their herbs. Medicines in this elevated form can be charged with spiritual power using rites, spells, and invocations. Next slide, please. Women diviners in Igbo land often combine divination with herbal healing. Some women who become diviners receive the gift of seeing when they are young. Others are called by the spirit of Awu when they are older, and still others are initiated into the divining society through training. Female diviners in training go through a rigorous process of training and initiation, during which secrets and workings of medicines are exposed to them. During this process, the apprentice learns all there is to know about divination tools and the dibia, or medicine doctor's bag. The dibia's bag contains implements for divination, including, next slide please, statues of Awu and Awu's vulture, a small pot, which is the source of the diviner's information, divination seeds, and a small basket. During the initiation, the apprentice's eyes open so that she can see the spirits and foretell the future. Other women are directly possessed by the deity of medicine, health, and divination, Awu. Awu reveals its possession by scattering the brain of the possessed. A person whom Awu has called to be a diviner is visited with misfortunes and financial devastation, which convince the person that Awu wants them to become a diviner. A person so possessed is scared and confused, consults a diviner who explains that Awu never takes no for an answer. The individual has no choice but to perform the preliminary sacrifice to Awu, then begin their training and initiation. Next slide, please. Onye Nnaja Ugwuatama, diviner and healer extraordinaire of Abedem, was visited by the spirit of Awu as a young girl. She was bestowed with the gift of seeing and healing, but was fearful of the gift and power, fearful of the gift and power it was having on her life. She thus tried to resist the calling. However, after many years of inner turmoil and struggle, during which she lost child after child in death, Nwunye Nnaja succumbed to the pressure of the divination deity and would become one of the greatest healers in northern Igbo land. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In South Africa, Sangomas are the most highly respected healers. Through divination, prescription of herbal medicine, and the performance of rituals tailored for specific requirements, Sangomas can diagnose illness, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, cure ailments, and restore well-being. Next slide, please. The Zulu believe that it is not uncommon for their ancestors, Amanlozi, to meddle in the day-to-day life of human beings. Their meddling can take the form of sending illness isifo, to the living. They do so not because they are wicked, but to punish the living for violations of ethical standards for communal living, including failing to conduct important rituals or violating taboos. Individuals thus afflicted are spiritually polluted and imbalanced and must be restored. This is where the Sangoma comes in. She has the power and the know-how to determine the cause of the ailment, that is, whether it is physical or spiritual, and then determine the rituals that must be conducted to appease the offended ancestors and restore the person to good health. Sangomas are respected because of their supernatural power and the influence they have in society. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I will now conclude with a short case study of Nana Afua Nsiah, a priestess healer in the village of Nsiah in present-day Ghana. When a spirit shows itself to her, a dramatic physical transformation takes place. And depending on what spirit possesses her, the priestess healer evokes the manner and style of the possessing spirit. Sometimes Nana Afua Nsiah becomes a warrior, a royal personage, or even a Christian pastor, demonstrating that the African religious pantheon is flexible and fluid enough to evolve new deities, including Christian deities. When possessed of the various spirits, Nsiah exudes the power and authority and influence of her deity. She gives advice, prescribes medicines, and helps recover lost items. She also serves the important function of diagnosing severe illnesses such as mental illness, leprosy, blindness, barrenness, and impotence. Beyond this, she helps determine the reason for poor harvests, trade, and other economic enterprises. It is the authority that Nsiah has because of her connection to the spiritual world that positions her as an influential, respected leader. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Wanda. Please keep your camera on for a few questions. So thank you. I mean, my summary of that is a recognition of the role that women have played in all spheres of leadership, in health, politics, agriculture, enterprise, trade, etc., in our history. And there are commonalities about that role across the entire continent. So I will start by offering the first question, and then we'll take it from there. So for many of us, this is not a history that is known. So how do we find out more? Because like we said in setting the scene for this session, we need to, there is a belief out there that women in leadership is foreign to African culture. And what you've just described for us in this very brief presentation, because I know that there is so much more out there, actually shows that that is not the case. So how do we understand more about our pre-colonial history and practices and the role of women there so that we can use that to challenge the perception that women in leadership is acultural for us, so that we can actually say, hang on, it isn't. How do we do that?
That is the $1 billion question, right? And that is why I became the Africanist historian that I am today. It was that desire to see myself in history. And written text do not portray African women, right? in leadership. And the bottom line from my almost 30 years of researching and writing African women's worlds, I can tell you that in the pre-colonial era, African women were never subordinate to African men. Whether it be in politics or economics or religion, we had what we called a dual sex system in operation, in which men took care of what was important to men and women took care of what was important to women, right? But how do we know this? It is hard to come by this information because colonialism happened, right? And in colonialism happening, what's happening there? You have these male leaders, I call them older white men, moving into Africa. They are connecting with African men, right? And asking them information about Africa. That's what ends up in the African archives, right? And so if you're somebody like me who is interested in learning about women, in learning about the female principle, you're not going to find any of that information in the archives. And so I talk about what is the true African archive. The true African archive is the African elder, male and female, right, in the rural areas. That is the true African library. We pass on our history from one generation to the next. So for me, I'm able to uncover this history by really deep diving into oral history, by looking at different ways of uncovering and conceptualizing our history, which are not the regular ways in which Western historians write history. So it's African history beyond the archive. It is about our history in music, in dance, right? I remember growing up in Nigeria, and when I was a young kid, we sang about Amina, Queen Amina, right? I remember those songs, right? So there is history in song. There is history. And in fact, African history sang, right? We sing and we dance our history. These African griots and griots, these are trained historians that tell our history from one generation to the next, to the next, to the next. So Dr. Okereke, it's really a hard question in the sense that very little of this history has been written. But people like me and a slew of other gender historians have made it their life's commitment to uncover this world of African women, right? This powerful world, and to tell this history so that we will know at what point did African women lose the power? It was during the colonial period. And we still have not regained it. We still have not regained it.
Wow. I'll bring in Professor Agnes first, and then we'll